on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
Welcome back to the land of the cherry blossoms. Round 4 of the Formula One World Championship arrives at the iconic Suzuka circuit in Japan. One session done with free practice 2 about to get underway, with grey clouds surrounding this figure of 8 circuit as rain has been coming down for the last few minutes. Wet conditions then for our 19 drivers that are taking part. News coming in just before the session that after a crash in FP1, Logan Sargent's Williams has received extensive damage and will not be taking part in free practice 2. Guiding you through all the coverage is myself, Harry Benjamin. Alongside me is racing driver Alice Powell and BBC F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Alice, let's start with this Sargent news, with having Williams not able to get that car out in FP2 due to the damage. It's the last thing they needed, especially after Australia.
Yeah, it's not ideal. Luckily, James Vowles said that the chassis is okay, so the damage sustained really is just made to the outside of the bits around the edge of the chassis, but extensive damage, so he won't be taking part in this free practice 2 session, which could be potentially not necessarily a bad thing because it's raining, Harry, and it's not the lightest of rain that we've seen, but it's of course not the heaviest of rain that we've seen here at Suzuka too. But the only thing that could hamper his progress later on in the weekend is of course that if we do get some decent amount of running here in the wet, he's going to miss out on that if we don't get any wet running in free practice 3 tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Session just about to start. No one in a mad rush and queuing at the end of the pit lane. Everyone staying undercover as the Pacamax and the umbrellas come out in the grandstands. Air temperature dropping. It was 16 degrees around all that for FP1, down to 13.8. Track temperature 17.6 degrees as well. And if you're a bit surprised that we're in Suzuka already, it's not towards the end of the season. We've shifted it forward to its normal slot now in April, the earliest the Japanese Grand Prix has ever been. It was only just over half a year ago we were back in Suzuka for the 2023 race. But from the look on some of those in the grandstands, feeling the cold slightly. Let's bring you up to speed with how the championship lies after 3 rounds this season. It's Max Verstappen who leads the way. Only a 4-point lead though after retiring from the Australian Grand Prix. He has 51 points to his name. Charles Leclerc in second with 47 points. Then it's Perez, Sainz and Piastri, the top 5. Over in the Constructors' Championship, it's Red Bull who lead the way, 97 points to their name, 4 ahead of Ferrari in second. Then it's McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin, the top 5. RB heading up those in the second part of the field in front of Haas. Then it's Williams, Sauber and Alpine who bring up the rear of the field. The bottom 3 teams yet to get off the mark in this season, in a time where points are very rare to come by for those in the second half of the field. Haas and RB making gains over their competitors in these early stages. But Alice, while it was so unexpected to see Verstappen retire from a race last time out in Australia, he's already struck back with a vengeance and topped FP1 with his teammate alongside him.
He did. He was just over a tenth and a half clear of his teammate Sergio Perez, then 2/10 clear of Carlos Sainz in third. But yeah, certainly, Harry, normal service resumed for Max Verstappen, and when we got to see his lap earlier on in the day from free practice 1, it looked fairly comfortable from the current champion. So not too many dramas out there for Red Bull at the moment. Only real drama really was for Sargent, Logan Sargent. I don't think anyone else actually had any off-track excursions. As Fernando Alonso, we're seeing pictures of him at the moment in the garage, jacket on. That's a sign that it is pretty chilly. Air temperature 13.6 degrees. Doesn't look like there's any sign of anyone really rushing to put their helmet on. Of course, it depends how much rain you get. Our timing screen is saying low grip conditions, which I guess is kind of obvious because it's raining. George Russell, he's got a headset on, just waiting. As I said, no one really looking to go out on track. But if there isn't enough rain, so not enough moisture on the circuit, if they go out on the intermediate tyres, it'll just destroy those tyres. So that won't be any productive running. However, it looks like there could be too much water on track for there to go on slicks. So this is why we're not really seeing anybody go out on track, because there's probably that, what they say, the middle ground where, you know, it's too wet for dry and it's too dry for wet. So, and obviously no one really wants to necessarily risk at this moment in time going out on either tyre.
And the other thing, Alice, of course, is that there's a limited set of treaded tyres for the weekend. I think it's 4 intermediate sets and 3 full wets, and or extremes as they're called. And so because there is a forecast for mixed weather throughout Saturday and Sunday, they need to save those tyres for qualifying in the race. So they're not going to burn them up in free practice, and it really would be, as you say, burning them up in these kind of weird, not really anywhere conditions that we've got in Japan at the moment.
And ironically, I think part of the reason we've moved Japan so early is to try and avoid the typical rain and typhoon season that we would be typically greeted with towards the back end of the year. But the conditions might be similar tomorrow, so if they can get some running, it might be worth it.
Well, it's not a typhoon, Harry. I can assure everybody of that.
Not now.
I mean, I think there's basically, when Liberty Media came into Formula One in 2017, moving Japan to the spring was one of their main targets. They wanted to if we just go back a couple of steps, they wanted to sort of reconstitute the calendar and make it make more sense on a logistical and an environmental footing. And although it looks a bit weird to have like Australia followed by 2 weeks apart, Japan followed by 2 weeks apart, China, of course that means all the drivers and the team bosses and lots of the team personnel will go back to Europe, but the kit can go from one to the other. And so that does have a big knock-on effect in terms of CO2 emissions. And then the other thing about Japan was that they thought it was a bit weird to schedule a Grand Prix in the middle of typhoon season. And having been in Japan for a typhoon, I can tell you it's not a particularly pleasant experience. I think it was 2019, Typhoon Panpone, I think it was called, and it was quite a scary feeling being in Suzuka on the Friday and seeing, I think, what was at the time one of the biggest typhoons in recorded history heading straight for us, and thinking, goodness, it was like 600 miles across this thing.
Wow.
And I was thinking, I don't really want to be here. And as it happened, it turned the corner a little bit and didn't miss Suzuka, but we didn't get the worst of it. But the whole track action was cancelled on the Saturday, I think. We all had to stay in our hotels. I went up and down 10 floors of stairs about 20 times trying to get some exercise in. But the weirdest thing was, I'd stayed in the hotel all day, and it looked like it was sort of dying down. In the evening, it kind of stopped raining. It still looked a bit windy. And Tom Clarkson and I, Tom Clarkson's the compere people may hear on the FIA press conferences from time to time, and the driver things after the qualifying and races, we thought, well, let's wander down the road to the restaurant, and we headed off. And as it happened, we couldn't get into the restaurant because Ferrari had booked it out. But I nearly got blown off my feet, even though it looked like the wind had died down by then. So it was pretty serious. So Formula One thought, this is a bit stupid. It keeps happening every now and again. A day gets cancelled, or you have a race hit by rain. Jules Bianchi, let's not forget, was killed 10 years ago. It's the 10-year anniversary this year, although not this weekend, because obviously it's now in April, not in October. They thought, this is daft, let's change it. And it took a while to persuade Honda, who owned Suzuka, to change the calendar, but they've finally done it. And of course the extra corollary is that it's blossom season, which is a big thing in Japan. And I've noticed today there have been many shots of the cherry tree by the grandstand on the pit straight. They're obviously making the most of it.
Is this my time now that I can say there are 226 varieties of cherry tree found in Japan?
Can you name them, please?
There's the pink cherry tree and the blossom cherry tree, and many more of that ilk. That information is supplied by Ferrari. I fully put the blame at their door for any inaccuracies there. FP2 has started, by the way, 55 minutes and 10 9.8 seconds, but we've been chatting and nobody has really decided to go out. It is raining. Air temperature 13.3 degrees, track temperature 17 degrees. Coats are on. The pit walls are lined with personnel, but the cockpits are not having any drivers sit in them for the time being. And actually for somebody like Daniel Ricciardo, Alice, who had to miss free practice 1 because we had the young Japanese racer Ayumu Iwasa taking part in that session. He's now handed that car back over to Ricciardo for the rest of the season, but no running in FP1 and, well, limited running, at least for the time being, in FP2. It's not how he really would want to get back on things.
Bit of a Freudian slip there, Harry. Rest of the season, wouldn't be quite so sure about that. Given Ricciardo's form at the moment.
You got me on that one there. Well, this unlocks that whole treasure chest, doesn't it? But already under limited track time for this weekend, which after the pressure that is clearly surrounding Ricciardo in that seat at the moment and his performances is not what he needs.
No, it's not what he needs, but he's done plenty of laps around this Suzuka circuit. He's a very experienced driver, one of the most experienced drivers on this Formula One grid, so he should slot back into his RB quite nicely, even if we don't get out or he doesn't do many laps in this second free practice session, as drivers continue to wait. And it's kind of a period of time where you're like, I just want to get going now, but you'd fully understand, as Andrew said, about the limitation with the wets throughout this weekend. Same with the slicks. They come this weekend with 2 sets of hard, 3 medium, 8 softs. It's the hardest tyre range, same as Bahrain, that we have. So we have the C1, which is the hard, C2 medium, C3 soft. And interestingly, its 2-strop strategy has been the best in previous years, but maybe just think if it is dry, Andrew, we might see possibly a one-stopper if the drivers are kind enough to their tyres, given the lower temperatures as well.
It's always tough to do a one-stop at Suzuka, even on the hardest compounds, because there's so much lateral load put in at such high speed, particularly through the S's. But of course, it's not just the S's. You've also got Dunlop, Foot2, Degner, Spoon, 130R, even turns 1 and 2 in the final corner. They're all high load, high speed corners, so it really puts the tyres through the ringer. So I'm not saying no, I'm not saying people won't try a one stop. Sometimes people do. They always want to do a one stop if they can, but it's not, as you said earlier, Alice, it's not very common. And it's a little bit early to be saying that, because of course they've not done the long runs yet, and the producer will be disappointed. It doesn't look like we're going to get long run cornering, does it, Joe?
Still got 50 or so minutes to try and make something happen. If you want to get in touch, you can, and we would encourage you to do so. Hashtag BBC F1 with your thoughts and questions on anything and everything. Jason has actually just got in touch saying, I remember being in Suzuka 2004 when a typhoon hit. We had the quali on the Sunday morning as well. So you may perhaps give us your best or your most significant Japanese Grand Prix memories from over the years. Hashtag BBC F1, or any questions you want to fire at us. It's my name's Harry Benjamin. Alongside me is the racing driver Alice Powell and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. We might get some action. Oscar Piastri is sat in his car, helmet on.
It's probably the warmest place.
Well, that's a good point, actually. Gloves just perched over the top of the steering wheel, unlike Max Verstappen, who is he stood actually to the side of his garage gantry, having a chat with his team principal, Christian Horner, and smiling away. Cap on, not a helmet though, so he's not in any kind of a rush, but it's a weekend as well where we're seeing quite a few teams bring some fairly significant upgrades. There's a lot of attention at the moment on some of Red Bull's upgrades that they've brought in the form of some new bits to their side pod and floor. Ferrari have also brought a new rear suspension. McLaren have got upgrades to the front corner of their car. Aston Martin with upgrades to the floor and their diffuser. Alpine, in their desperation to get off the back of the pack, with upgrades to their front wing, the corner and the beam wing. Williams, well, they were all wings, and now they'll be working frantically to try and fix up Logan Sargent's car, ready for tomorrow's FP3 in qualifying running. RB bringing some upgrades to their floor, as are Sauber as well. Sauber also hoping to bring an end to their torrid run of pit stop form in the last few races. It quite possibly cost them any chance of scoring points with Valtteri Bottas in Melbourne last time around. But 3 races gone by and pit stop errors due to the wheel nuts getting cross-headed. It's an issue they're very well aware of and are working to fix, but Bottas and the team saying it might not be fully fixed until after China. So still a bit of fingers crossed and waiting and seeing. But it's quite isn't it, that kind of fundamental logistical mechanical issue, Alice, is a bizarre one, because he didn't see it coming at the beginning of the season, and 3 races gone by, same problem. It's a big issue for a team like that to have, which seems like it should be a fairly simple fix.
Yeah, nothing's ever simple in Formula One, though, is it? It's nothing is ever simple, and it's just such a complicated sport. Some things that even for a driver get asked several times by people that might necessarily have raced or driven before, go, well, if you're just a little bit off your teammate and you're losing it in this braking zone, sure, you just brake a little bit later. And it's like, yeah, if only it was that simple. And I guess that could be the sort of a similar situation, that it might seem a bit simple from the outside, but not necessarily on the other side. Yeah,
it is a bit of an own goal, though, it has to be said, from Sauber. You know, they've changed their pit stop equipment with the aim of making their pit stops faster. I shouldn't laugh, should I? But they can't get the nuts to affix to the wheels, and you would think that would be something that you would spot in the winter when you were practicing, right? Yeah. It's like, how has that not happened? It's almost impossible to believe, but there you are. These weird things do happen from time to time, and Sauber are really going through the mill as a result of it. Not as much as Williams are, it has to be said, but for different reasons.
But it could also be, we spoke about it earlier, didn't we, in Free Practice 1, that it's the pressure situation as well. So maybe when, you know, they practice the pit stops at the factory, as we are seeing movement now, we have a car going out on track. It's Lewis Hamilton on a set of medium tyres, and he clearly feels that it's dry enough to head out on a set of slicks. But just to finish off on this point, in the factory, they'll just either push the car into the fake pit area, basically, to practice the pit stops. And when you're under that stress environment, you know, on a race weekend, you can't really remake that, can you, on in the factory, you know, when there isn't really that much stress added. So possibly that will be some of it as well. But Hamilton's out there now, the only car on track, treading very carefully around this wonderful circuit.
12 or so minutes into the session then, and we get our first car out on track in the form of 7-time champion Lewis Hamilton, as you say, Alice, tentatively making his way just out through the second Degner as he now approaches the run down to the hairpin. Heavy braking into the left-hander on a set of medium compound of tyres. It was raining fairly heavily in the 5 minutes building up to FP2, and it still is spitting, but perhaps it is slowly starting to ease off a bit. But Hamilton then, the first to brave it and test out the conditions, makes his way through turns 13 and 14, double left-hander that make up Spoon Curve. Everyone will be watching Hamilton to see how he tentatively makes his way towards the end of this lap.
It looks pretty dry, doesn't it, Alice?
I was actually thinking the exact same thing.
Yeah, there's no spray coming off the tyres or anything like that. I mean, he is being very careful. You can hear that he's being so careful, and we can see it on the pictures too, but it doesn't really look like there's any reason why people can't go out, just looking at it from here.
No, a little bit skittish on the exit there. Perfect on cue.
It's pretty dry. There's a couple of small spots, but curves and stuff are a little bit wet.
There you go.
We're going to so just be careful on those curves, but if you're happy, it'll be strap mode 2.
And I suspect that there's some spray coming up on the exit curve of turn 2 for Hamilton there, but I suspect that's going to mean a whole stream of cars start coming out now.
Yeah, someone had to go out, and they all waited for Lewis Hamilton too, and he's reported back, and I imagine imminently we'll see some more cars on track. 45 minutes and 22 20 seconds remain of free practice 2. 19 drivers in the running with no Logan Sargent after his crash in FP1, and Williams saying the extensive damage to that car means they cannot get it out in time for this session. They have said the chassis seems okay, everything else rather not so okay. Interesting one on Lewis Hamilton, having the retirement in Australia last time out, power unit issue. He's actually had to lose that engine out of his allocation as well, so that could come back to, or that will come back to bite him at some stage in the form of a grid penalty. But Alice, I mean, Mercedes is such a curious one again this year, where they, and it seemed from the outside looking in that they were full of optimism, and this might be the year where they took another step forward and finally getting their head around these ground effect regulations which came in the last couple of seasons. But yet Russell and particularly Hamilton just haven't quite been there with the pace. Is this Mercedes just fundamentally still not understanding these regulations? Are they almost having to write off this form and wait for 2026? Here is Hamilton again.
Is there anyone else out?
Negative, Lewis, yeah. We're happy to box. We've just got some brake indicators up at sector 1 now.
As Hamilton comes in to the pits, he indeed was the only one. No one else then wanting to join him on that occasion. He makes his way towards the Mercedes pit box. But do they then... Oh, Ricciardo's gone out as well. So in the RB, so having missed FP1, so he'll need some much track time as possible. But yeah, Alice, the Mercedes situation, what do you reckon?
Yeah, they haven't got it right, plain and simple, have they? And last time out was disaster. Okay, George Russell, had that incident with Fernando Alonso, but it wasn't looking great.
Yeah, it's starting to rain more.
Copy that.
Daniel Ricciardo coming through the second Degner, reporting more rain, and he is very tentative. You can hear him barely touching the throttle as he eases off into the braking zone for the hairpin. He is also out there. He's stuck on a set of slicks, the medium compound of tyre, to make his way around. He'll be hoping it clears up sooner rather than later.
Yeah, he's certainly one. You can see there visibly, we can see on the pictures that it is raining a lot more now at the moment, so quite understandably he's coming into it's back to Mercedes. They just haven't got it right. Hamilton seemed to be fairly positive coming into this year, but actually I would probably say they're worse off than they were sort of last year. Would you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, it's a really interesting situation. They so obviously they spent 2 years with a design philosophy that was different from Red Bull's, and they've decided to abandon that for this year and go for something more conventional. But of course the question was, over those 2 years, first of all, why had they chosen that design philosophy when others hadn't? And secondly, as a consequence of that, did they really understand what was going on with these ground effect cars? And it now transpires, no, they didn't. And Toto Wolff has admitted, the team principal, that the problem is that the simulation tools, so the wind tunnel particularly and the CFD, is telling them that they've got more downforce than the car actually has when it's out on the track. And it's particularly problematic in high-speed corners. So fundamentally, there's something happening under the car that they haven't understood, which they're quite happy to admit it. But it's quite an alarming position for a team of Mercedes' success and also aspiration to be in. It's easy to say, oh well, they started behind and they haven't caught up. It's not as simple as that, because obviously they're also behind. They're the fourth fastest car on average so far this season, and only just ahead of Aston Martin. And actually, interestingly, I asked Toto Wolff this question in Australia because it just occurred to me while he was talking. Aston Martin used Mercedes wind tunnel, and if we remember, Aston Martin started last year in a really competitive position, tried to upgrade the car and got a bit lost, and then had to come back on a few things. And then this year, well, we don't know how they're going to get on, but they started the year as the fifth fastest car, whereas last year they started as the second fastest car. So it does raise the question, is there something fundamentally not right about Mercedes wind tunnel? And of course, they don't know whether that's the issue or not. But what they do definitely know is that the car doesn't perform the way they expected it to perform, and that's exactly what had happened in 2022 and 2023. It's a slightly different nature of problem, but it's the same route in that it doesn't do what they think it's going to do. And so they've not nailed things in the way that Red Bull have particularly, but not just Red Bull. Ferrari have also made conspicuous progress this season, and McLaren made conspicuous progress last season in a way that Mercedes haven't been able to.
We talk about it being quite tight behind Red Bull, and it was great just for sheer enjoyment to see Carlos Sainz, a different driver, win a race. I think well, I speak for myself, but I think for other people as well, we don't care who wins. We just want to see a good fight for the win, and we haven't really had that over the last couple of years. And with these regulation changes, when they were brought in, designed to reduce the dirty air that comes off the back of the car, so you're allowed to get closer racing and lead to a more even spread. While some statistics can say that, the field has generally closed up, Alice, I still don't think we're really getting great racing. To me, I don't really think these regulations have worked in the way they wanted to.
No, they certainly haven't at all. I mean, we were lucky we got such a great season in 2021, 2020, going to some interesting tracks, that sparked off some really exciting races, I thought. And then it's just really tailed off, hasn't it? We've just not had any real fantastic races. I can think back in the past couple of years, Singapore was a good race last year.
Who won that one?
Well, yeah, Carlos Sainz. Even last a couple of weekends ago in Australia. I mean, I know we should be saying we love Formula One and it's so exciting, everyone should watch it. But even though Max Verstappen was out of the race, it still wasn't the most exciting race. I know we got a new winner, which was brilliant, but it wasn't the most exciting race, even though we took Max out of the equation because he obviously had the brake issue. So yeah, it's something fundamentally needs to change. But I feel like every time there's a new rule change, it doesn't really make the racing that much different.
So there's real concern in Formula One at the moment because there's a new set of rules coming in 2026, and people aren't being that outspoken about it, but there's definitely a sort of undercurrent of anxiety about whether it's going in the right direction. So first of all, there's obviously an issue with these current cars. The rules haven't really worked in the way that they intended them to work. They have closed up the field. The field spread, so the gap from front to back is definitely smaller than it used to be under the old rules. But the problem is the old rules might have closed up too if they just left them alone. But the cars aren't really any better at racing, and we've had two of the most dominant seasons in Formula One history at a time when there's new rules that were meant to make it more competitive. So that's one issue. The other issue is that the drivers don't really like the cars. They run too low, they're uncomfortable, they hit the bumps too hard. Max Verstappen and George Russell were both talking about that in Bahrain, and it comes up every now and again. Carlos Sainz talked about it again yesterday in the media sessions. So that's that. Then you've got the fact that these new rules in 2026 are coming in, and they will fundamentally be based on these rules, chassis-wise. But there's a new engine formula, and that is introducing a much greater proportion of electrical power as a sort of proportion of the entire power output of the engine. But they've taken out the MGU-H, which is the hybrid element that recovers energy from the turbo, so the engines are less efficient. So to compensate for that, they've had to find a way to make the cars less draggy, and to do that, they're thinking about using movable aerodynamics. And the drivers are going, whoa, hang on a minute. So you've created an issue with the engines, which, with the best intentions, it's brought Audi in, for example, and Ford for that matter. But that's had a knock-on effect on the cars, and then you're adding this extra level of complexity onto cars that we're still not that happy with. And meanwhile, the engineers, just to make the final point, on the running close to the ground, a lot of them say you don't have to run ground effect cars so close to the ground. It's only the way these particular rules are structured that stops them running them higher. You could run the cars higher and therefore not have this banging issue that they're having, but still have ground effect. But because of the FIA and what they're focusing on, which is wake, rather than other things that they could focus on, James Allison and Mercedes is very vocal on this subject. They are forced to run the cars so close to the ground. So you add all of that stuff together, it doesn't paint a particularly pretty picture, does it, about the health of Formula One?
How about bring back refueling? Why not? It's never going to happen, but
bring back
could
refueling.
make it a bit more exciting.
Well,
back in the day.
Well, you might say that, Alice, but if you look at the stats, the overtaking era was the era with the least amount of overtaking in Formula One history.
But maybe we've got the DRS, it might help a little bit.
Yeah, but then that's another sticking plaster solution to fix an issue that ideally wouldn't be there in the first place.
That's true, but I'm not a genius. I'm just going with the refueling. What else can we add back in?
The ultimate formula, no restrictions. Have at it. How would you make the racing better? Hashtag BBC F1. Let us know. I thought we might be rewarded with a car coming out on track. The McLaren garage looked all but set to send Oscar Piastri out, and they might well still do that, but he hasn't come out just yet. A couple of drivers just sitting in their cars, helmets on, waiting to be sent out. In fact, we've only had 2 drivers come out on track, Hamilton, and then he came back into the pits after 12 minutes. The session started 12 minutes later. Hamilton came out, tentative lap and a half around. Then Ricciardo came out as well, but then it started raining a little bit harder as Ricciardo went out on the slicks, and now Piastri has decided to come out, but it has rained a little harder in the last 5 minutes and continues to do so, and Piastri is out there on the intermediate tyre. The Australian, he took his maiden front row and Grand Prix podium here last year, makes his way now up through the S's in the slightly redesigned livery of the McLaren, still predominantly papaya, but has a dragon racing through clouds with inspiration from Japanese calligraphy as a special one-off livery for this Grand Prix. Piastri then making his way out through the second Degner now, and you can see already compared to when Hamilton went out, there was no spray at that time, and there is still a little bit now of spray coming off the back of Piastri's McLaren out there on the Inters, exploring what these conditions are like. But the fans with smiles on their faces waiting out there in the rain, and they are getting to see one car at least out on track.
Yeah, it's certainly, you wouldn't want to be going out there on slicks, that's for sure. Right tyre for Oscar Piastri. Be interesting to see how many laps he actually does, because they're limited to the number of sets of this intermediate tyre that they have, and if we do have rain possibly coming later on in the weekend, I think it's about 40 to 50% chance of rain during the race on Sunday, then you're going to want to obviously save as many of these intermediates as you can.
Not really that wet. Copy that, Oscar.
That's Piastri saying it's not really that wet, but is it dry enough to put on the slicks? That's this in that awkward middle ground where it's not wet enough but not quite dry enough either. Piastri coming back into the pits then and lines up outside of his garage being greeted by his mechanics. Zhou Guanyu in the Sauber has decided to make his way out as well. He's also on the intermediate tyres, the Chinese racer making his way, so we'll see how he reports back on this.
Yuki Tsunoda as well.
And the home hero, absolutely. Tsunoda makes his way out onto the track. That's the sound you can hear up through the gears now as he makes his way out of the pit lane and joins into the right-hander of turn 1.
It's in that sticky part of the track drying phase, if you like. You need cars to go out and go round to dry the track. You need the wind to pick up slightly, the temperature to rise, and the air temperature has actually dropped now. We're 12.8 degrees, so it is getting a little bit cooler. But of course, Oscar's already said, and Tsunoda has been told on the radio no more rain expected, but Oscar has said, well, it's not wet enough for these intermediate tyres. You don't want to destroy those set of wets, but obviously it's too wet for the slick tyres, so no one's going to want to go around risking it on slick tyres. But currently Bottas now, Tsunoda and Zhou have decided that they're going to explore on the intermediate tyre. Maybe one of them will dry the track out for the rest, sacrifice a set of wets for the rest of the field and drive round, but I wouldn't be surprised if we'll see them heading back into the pits, if not at the end of this lap, probably the lap after.
Bottas makes his way through the second Degner in the fluoro green Sauber, and saying coming into this weekend as the Finnish driver, wanting to begin exploring some talks with Sauber and who will become Audi when it comes to a contract renewal. Still early days, and after the first 3 races, well, it's not Bottas's fault with the pit stop issues that we've described earlier on, causing Sauber to suffer quite a bit with their race results, but Bottas trying to secure his place on the grid for a little longer. Tsunoda, though, across the line and starting his first flying lap, so we can see what he's got in anger now in these tricky conditions on the intermediate tyre. Makes his way through turns 1 and 2 as he then heads uphill through the S's. The flow left and right and bring you up towards Dunlop Curve. That is where Logan Sargent had his off in FP1. No Sargent's due to the extensive damage in that Williams. Up over the crest for Tsunoda. Slight left-hand kink, which brings you towards the first of the Degners, the gravel to your left, and that's what I think a lot of people love about these kind of old school tracks, Alice, isn't it? Is that you are punished. The gravel is right there, so is the grass. Any small mistake and you feel it.
You do, and some people probably think, well, why? Surely you don't want to be floating and flirting with the danger, but that just adds the element to racing and pushing a race car to the absolute limit and running the risk of dipping a wheel into the gravel or sending yourself into the barrier. That's what we want. We love that danger, and I love street circuits, and I think most drivers love street circuits because there is no room for error, and this is almost this is not a street circuit, of course, but if you do go off, you're either going to get stuck in the gravel or you're likely to hit something like Logan Sargent did, as Yuki Tsunoda is purple as expected in the first sector and the second sector. He will set the first proper lap time of today of this session, on the intermediate tyre, 1:42.3. Looks like he's totally backed off. It does look a lot wetter in the first sector compared to the second sector and the third sector. So the first sector runs all the way up to where Logan Sargent did have his accident in turn 7. As now Alexander Albon has decided to venture out, but Bottas, Zhou have ventured back into the pits.
26 minutes and 51 seconds. Yuki Tsunoda with the fastest time at the moment, a 1:42.304 on that intermediate. Ricciardo, a 1:46.4. Everybody else not out there due to the slow start to this FP2 session with rain delaying things. Albon, now, as you say, Alice, is out on track. Tsunoda continues round on an off lap. Do you think if it continues the way it's going for Yuki Tsunoda, beating Ricciardo, and if things stay the same at Red Bull, let's just hear from Albon.
So feedback from some other cars, potentially 2 dry. They've done a single push lap, potentially 2 dry for Inter.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Albon then conferring with his engineer, 2 dry for intermediates. Is he going to put on a set of slicks and try it and see what happens with the team that is very worried about spare parts? They might well not risk it on this occasion, but gets put up onto the jacks and wheeled back into the garage. If it continues the way it's going for Yuki Tsunoda in terms of outperforming Daniel Ricciardo, and from within the RB team, it seems like they're rating him really highly, quite impressed with his progress this year. And it stays the same at Red Bull, where Verstappen does continue on and Perez doesn't really improve his form. Do you think Tsunoda deserves a shot in that second Red Bull seat?
I mean, yeah, if he's proved himself in the RB seat, then the logic is to, of course, move him up into the prime seat, prime position in the Red Bull seat. But of course, we know that Red Bull can work in strange ways, and that is not always going to be the case as Tsunoda continues actually to go round. So he's done a push lap, a cool lap, and now looks like he's doing somewhat of a push, but no, I think he does. But you know, Liam Lawson, I thought, did a really good job and put pressure on Yuki Tsunoda, and I actually was disappointed that he wasn't given the opportunity over Daniel Ricciardo. They clearly went for experience there, but as we've already touched on, Daniel Ricciardo needs to pull his socks up, and as Andrew said, the rumour circulating at the moment in the paddock that he's got possibly up to Miami to sort himself out on track, and that's only a couple of races away, so not long will we see another change in the, you could effectively say, the second seat there at RB. Yuki Tsunoda looks fairly safe. He's doing a really good job, I personally think, at the moment, as he's gone purple in the first sector. That's fastest overall out of anyone that has set a time at the moment, and he improves again in the second sector. But it does look they're considerably drier in these final two sectors on the track. Certainly sector 1 is the wettest of them all. Still a lot of spray a decent amount of spray in the first sector. He's back now and goes 5.5 seconds clear of his teammate in P2, Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, a slow start to FP2 with rain delaying things. Not many drivers risking the conditions. Cars slowly starting to come out as it dries up. It's the home hero Yuki Tsunoda in the RB, currently fastest at the moment. Max Verstappen topped FP1, looking to strike back after retiring from the Australian Grand Prix last time out. Sorry to interrupt you there, Alice.
So I'll let you off.
23 minutes remaining of this FP2 session, and the man you were just talking about, Liam Lawson, is in Suzuka and sat on the pit wall in his reserve driver duties on the RB pit wall, watching his teammate Yuki Tsunoda, who has just gone fastest. Ricciardo as well, finding more time, about 9/10 the gap between the two RB drivers right now. We could be watching a shootout for a Red Bull seat right now, if you were that way inclined.
Well, we want to shoot out for something, don't we?
Or for something. With the only two cars on track are the two RBs, but conditions proving tricky. Too dry in some parts, but not dry enough in others. Both RB cars out on the intermediate tyres. Nobody else out there at the moment as it currently stands. Ricciardo, best finish of third place around this track back in 2017, and Tsunoda hoping for a few extra attempts to score him his first points on home ground. Yet to do that in his last few appearances here. Best finish of 12th for Tsunoda around this track.
It looks like the RB cars are going to be the ones that are going to sacrifice themselves and do a bit of track drying for everybody else, because the wind speed is certainly fairly low. Track temperature continues to drop, so does the air temperature, so that's not going to help matters on track as well. Still people in the crowd have got their rain max on, but brollies are down, so it doesn't look like it's raining anymore. Yuki Tsunoda, as I said that, seems like I spoke way too soon, comes in, decides, no, do you know what, I'm not going to drive the track for everybody else. I'm going to park it in the pits, and so does Daniel Ricciardo, so that's just totally ruined it, hasn't it?
Hashtag BBC F1, how would you make racing better? We've got all the solutions right here. Josh has said it's actually pretty simple to fix the racing. Manual, H-pattern gearboxes and rock-hard tyres. It's about making performance hard to find and, crucially, very easy to lose via driver mistakes. Bring back the H-pattern gearbox.
Yeah, love it. Bring back the old school. I'm up for that.
And actually, House of Graham, I think this is you that said this, Alice, and he agrees with you. Just leave the regs, it always closes up before they make a change. Teams can run either new or old regs for 5 years. Right. Well, I think the bottom line of that one is 2021 was so close because it was getting towards the end of a regulation cycle. It was the end of one, right? And that is typically when suddenly everybody's caught up. And then they go and pull the plug and go, well, why are you changing it now? It's really tight, it's close, it's good racing. That to me doesn't seem quite, logical.
Do you know where? Okay, so here's this. Where do we see the best racing if you're going to look at a single seater sense? Because of course you're going to get closer racing in the touring cars. It's just natural that you're going to get closer racing. It's easy to follow. You get it in the junior categories. So if any of our listeners ever watch Formula 2, Formula 3, that's of course all one make single-seater championship. So all the cars are the same. It's up to the driver and the teams. Formula 1's never going to go to a one make. But to add to that, as we do have Joe is on track. So another track dryer coming out onto the track. You also reverse grid races, and I know that's
I was batting the drum for that last year with the sprints.
I know people kick up, a fuss. I'm waiting for Andrew to pick his mic up here and give me his opinion, but if it's not working, I like reverse grid races, and I know the drivers are like, well, this is Formula 1, which should be about a Grand Prix, but I'm up for trying something new, and reverse grid races work lower down. Formula 2, Formula 3.
They're also 4. Spec, aren't they? Spec series.
Yeah,
so
spec
they're all the
series.
same car.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
So if it's not working, it will make the racing. Who wouldn't you love to see, if you do it, let's say, for example, do a full reverse grid race, wouldn't you love to see Max Verstappen starting at the back of the grid? Everyone's going to say, yeah, well, he'll come through and win the race. But let's say it's a full reverse grid sprint.
Well, this is why I thought, and I think it was Carlos Sainz who brought this up, and I'm sure some other people did last year when we were looking at perhaps a tweak to the sprint format where it was a reverse grid in championship order. So, as it currently stands, it would be Verstappen starting 20th and last. In front of him would be Charles Leclerc, then it would be Perez, then Sainz, and on pole would be Logan Sargent and alongside him Valtteri Bottas. Now, okay, you may go, well, that's just completely undoes everything that is and makes up what Formula 1 is, the pinnacle of motorsport. But in a sprint race, which has been added purely for entertainment purposes,
exactly.
Why not go full out entertainment? And because you're doing it in reverse championship order, Verstappen starting at the back wouldn't be able to cut through that quickly because he's got relatively competitive cars around him of an equal standing. Let's just, take his dominance to one side for the moment. It's not like he's got Sargent and Magnussen in front of him that he could theoretically easily overtake in a straight line. He'll have a fighting Ferrari. He'll have his teammate. He'll have another Ferrari, Mercedes. That's where I think we should have gone with that route. That could have made for some quite exciting racing and also given some real good opportunities for those teams further back in the pack to pick up some smaller points.
And people will then say, yeah, well, they'll just drive around because the points don't necessarily matter. But, for example, in the GB3 Championship, which races in the UK, it's effectively the old now. Yeah, it's effectively the old British F3 for those that remember that championship. But they don't do full reverse grid this year. I think it's top 12 as Joe decides that he's not going to drive the track anymore. Sorry, it's Bottas. He comes into the pits. Joe has also come into the pits, but they do points for. So you get, let's say you gained 6 places, you would get 6 points. So there's an incentive there for, instead of being like, right, do you know what? I'm just going to keep my nose clean. I'm starting 20th. I'm leading the championship. I don't want to run any risk. But if the driver that's next to you in the championship gains 10 places and you've just eased off the throttle and cruised around, then he's caught you by, or she has caught you by 10 points. So something else to think about there, but it's not going to happen, is it? It'll just all stay the same. But I guess it's
nice
good filler,
it's nice to dream, though, isn't it? It's nice to dream about
we love dreaming.
And if anybody is from the FIA listening, there you go. James, #PPCF1. How to improve the racing? At each pit stop, the driver has to get out of the car and change their own tyres, do 10 star jumps, and solve a Rubik's Cube before they can head back out. Again, I'm here for it.
Yeah. Who would be the most likely to solve the Rubik's Cube first?
Ooh, that's an excellent question.
Andrew Benson.
He's staring well clear of this.
He's fed up with our dribble.
We've got 15 minutes left. The most amount of laps completed so far in this session, 6. Courtesy of Daniel Ricciardo in the RB.
That's 6 points for you, Daniel Ricciardo.
Trying to get as much track time as possible after missing FP1 with the Red Bull Junior, Ayumu Iwasa, the young Japanese driver, stepping into that car and making it an all-Japanese lineup for FP1 for RB with Yuki Tsunoda, the regular driver in the other car. The first time 2 Japanese drivers have taken part in a Grand Prix session at the same time since 2010, the Korean Grand Prix with Kamui Kobayashi in a BMW Sauber and Sakon Yamamoto in a Hispania racing car.
Wow, inspiration.
Oh, yeah, I like
coming
that.
Up with it. Yeah, love it. Love it. Oh, I can hear there's an engine firing up somewhere. Don't know whereabouts. We can hear an engine. It's somewhere.
Lance Stroll sitting and waiting in his car, eager to perhaps head out there and try and get some track time running. Air temperature 12.6 degrees, track temperature 16.4 degrees. But the thing is, okay, maybe too dry in some areas, it may be too wet in others. And even the Ferrari mechanics have got the heating fans to try and dry up the grid box outside of the Ferrari garage to avoid any slippage from the cars coming in, but no sign of any movement in that Ferrari garage from either Sainz or Charles Leclerc. Ferrari, 7-time winners around this track, certainly improved their high-speed performance this year a lot. With they have brought a bit of an upgrade this time around to the rear suspension, but hearing a major upgrade is planned for Imola, so the beginning of the European season and the European leg of this, the longest season in Formula One history. 24 races. We'll also have our sprint races as well. First one will be at China, then Miami, then we'll have a sprint in Austria, Texas, Sao Paulo and Qatar will be the hosts of our sprint racing for this year.
I actually heard an interesting rumour the other day.
Oh, go on.
And whether it's true, of course, it is only just a rumour, but obviously Liberty Media have ventured into MotoGP now, and someone said to me they heard whispers that in the future they may look at doing a joint weekend.
Never going to happen. Surely.
I mean, I'd like that. That'd be quite cool.
I mean, it would be a great spectacle. But well, hey, who knows?
Who knows?
There's no smoke without fire. Yeah, that is quite a big news story off the track involving Formula One's owners, Liberty Media, purchasing the majority of the owners of MotoGP, the pinnacle of the two-wheeled world. And indeed, in Australia, there was a nice demo run with Jack Doohan, the Alpine Reserve driver, racing some old Renault cars, and his father, Mick Doohan, who's a motorcycle 500cc champion, doing the same, but on the motorbikes at the same time, which is quite a nice joint venture from those two. Yeah,
it was the old Benetton, wasn't it? That the beautiful sound. I remember watching the video over and over and over again, just loving the sound. Serious throwback as Iwasa is sat on the pit wall having a little look, nothing's going on. Sergio Perez having a chat to Christian Horner. We're seeing pictures in the background of the weather radar as well. Is that looking like maybe potentially some more rain coming? I hate to say it, but I don't think we're really going to get many, if any, cars going on track for the remainder of the 11 minutes left of this session, Harry. I'll try and be positive.
I don't think we're going to get a long run corner, and that's the real crime here, isn't it? I'll tell you what, just I want to bring up the topic of young drivers, because we were mentioning Ayumu Iwasa getting the shot in FP1, which is part of a new rule that came in a couple of years ago, where teams are mandated to have a certain amount of practice sessions allocated to a rookie driver. As we are going to get a car on track, Zhou Guanyu heads back out on the track in the Sauber on the intermediate tyres. So let's see how he gets on as he plunges down into turns 1 and 2. So Ayumu Iwasa getting that shot. Kimi Antonelli, the Mercedes protege, the young 17-year-old racing in Formula 2, is set for his maiden Formula 1 test at the Red Bull Ring later this month. 2-day test in the 2021 car. I'm sure we'll be seeing him in an FP1 session for Mercedes, probably Williams, maybe even Aston Martin as well. Any Mercedes power unit car would probably have him. And that's one of the things I think Formula 1 has done really well in the last few years, is giving those kind of opportunities a bit more to young drivers in a time where testing is so limited now in modern day cars, to see that young talent get a shot on the big stage. Liam Lawson last year as well. That to me is quite crucial in terms of, you know, seeing the progression of Formula 1 as the sport, because we want young drivers coming through. We want to see them get an opportunity and see if we can unearth the next Max Verstappen, the next Fernando Alonso.
100%. I'm always, and I have been an advocate, I can't get my words out, to have a young driver step up and into Formula 1 and give them the opportunity. You know, Formula 2 is such a hard championship. So is Formula 3, which is the series just below Formula 2. And those cars have got no power steering. You know, they've got a lot to deal with the tyres. Of course, no proper pit stops in Formula... I mean, they have one pit stop in Formula 2 during the feature race, but no pit stops in Formula 3. And there are some excellent drivers. Look how good Ollie Behrman did from stepping up in Jeddah for Carlos Sainz. I mentioned Antonelli. We've got Victor Martin's got such a list of incredible drivers coming up through the junior ranks, and it is really frustrating that they don't necessarily get the opportunity. I mean, winning a Formula 2 championship is hugely difficult. We got Théo Pourchaire, who won Formula 2 last year, has not had the opportunity to step up and race in Formula 1. He's had to move across and continue his single-seater driving in Super Formula. You've got Felipe Drugovich, who again is sitting on the sidelines, you know, wandering around the Aston Martin garage for a second year in a row because he's not had the opportunity to step up into a seat. So it's kind of frustrating for these drivers. It's very frustrating actually for these drivers, because a lot of money gets spent getting them up to this level, whether it's their own money, whether it's a sponsor's money. You know, Formula 2 is around about 2 million plus euros for a season, and I mean, I'd love to have 2 million euros in my back pocket to go out and spend on racing. So that much money gets spent, and it's frustrating for a lot of these drivers, because they're almost like, well, we win Formula 2 and we're a champion, and it's hugely impressive if you win the Formula 2 championship, but what is it getting you? You know, you're not eventually then stepping up into Formula 1, and I think the Formula 2 champions should be stepping up into Formula 1, but there's obviously no seats available. No,
only 20 on the grids, and of course we had a plethora of young drivers come in, you know, almost 10 years ago, and people are going on to have longer and longer careers in Formula 1. You look at the George Russells, the Charles Leclercs, the Alex Albons now, and then you've still got Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, competitive, showing their form at their age, and you think, well, where are the gaps going to come from? There probably aren't going to be many.
I think it's an interesting debate, this one, isn't it? We've started doing these Q&As on the BBC Sport website this year, and a lot of the questions are about young drivers and whether they're getting the opportunity to come into Formula 1. And my response to it is that I think it's an overblown issue. Here's Magnussen's radio.
Coming straight back in, mate.
Yeah, too wet. Copy that.
Same old problem we've been having all session. Too wet for slicks and too dry for wets. So to go back to the point about young drivers, I think Formula 1's a meritocracy, and you only get a go if you're good enough. And, you know, why should Fernando Alonso or Lewis Hamilton, for example, who are, one of them's beyond 40 and the other one will be 40 next year, why should they give up their seats to someone who's not as good as them, who just happens to be 20 years younger than them? It doesn't make any sense in that context. And I think here's Albon's radio.
Yeah, it's ready for 6.
There's a bit of a disagreement there between Magnussen and Albon, but maybe we will get a lap time from Albon's Williams. Let's find out. Mind you, there's only 5 minutes left, so whether it be of any merit is a different question. Anyway, just to finish the point, I think what you find is that the best drivers do get chances, and the names that you've just listed are an example of that. Max Verstappen was only 26. He got a drive in Formula 1 when he was 17. You know, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Alex Albon, for that matter. You know, they've all come into Formula 1 from the junior categories because they looked exceptional, and they proved to be exceptional, all of them. But the ones who don't look exceptional, they don't get a job, and why should they, frankly? And we're about to see it happening again next year. Ollie Bearman, the British driver who stood in for Carlos Sainz in Saudi Arabia 2 races ago when Sainz had appendicitis, he did an exceptional job in the second Ferrari. He'll be on the grid next year, as probably will Andrea Kimi Antonelli, his teammate. He's only 17. He's a Mercedes protege, but he's already looking pretty good in Formula 2. It's not quite delivered his complete potential yet, but I've been watching a couple of races. You can see there's promise there. And he's been doing some exceptional times in tests in the winter. He'll be in Formula 1 before long as well. So I don't really see this young driver issue in the same way that other people do. I don't see people who deserve it aren't getting their opportunities. But Alice is closer, perhaps, to the young driver world than I am. And maybe she's got a slightly different perspective on it.
I mean, yeah, I think Piastri, for example, he had to wait a year, didn't he, to step up. And I think personally he should have. How he dominated in the junior categories, as he's actually one of those drivers that's out on slicks at the moment on a soft tyre, venturing around this rather slippy Suzuka circuit with just over 3 minutes of the session remaining. But he dominated. He was in Formula Regional, won that in his first full season. Formula 3, won that in his first season. Formula 2, won that in the first season. You know, and then he had to wait for a year. And because there was a mess up on Alpine's part, and McLaren were fully on it and snatched him up, and deservedly got a seat in Formula 1. But, you know, it's okay, Théo Pourchaire, he had a few years to crack at it, so did Drogovic. But yeah, I hope to see Ollie Bearman. I mean, he's had a bit of an up and down season in Formula 2. Yes, qualified on pole in Jeddah, but certainly had a struggle last time out in Australia. So we'll see, but I think there should be more opportunities for these younger drivers to have a chance to get some running on a Formula 1 weekend. Of course, they have to do a practice session, but the amount of money that gets spent, they should have more opportunities from the Formula 1 teams. But the Formula 1 teams don't necessarily want to give too many opportunities, but I'm sure they'd love to, but it all boils down to money at the end of the day. They want to be pumping it into their car because points make good prizes.
You know, it always has and it always will. Politics and money will play a part. And I suppose coming back to the point about the last couple of F2 champions haven't made it onto the grid. When you look at the likes of, in the recent past, the Yuki Tsunodas, the Zhou Guanyus, the Logan Sargents, who have all been racing against those champions but haven't won the title or finished in the top 3 of the standings on some of those occasions, yet they get the opportunity above. But then you go, well, they might have a certain nationality, they might have money, they might be associated with one particular driver program, so that all plays a part as well. So it will be interesting certainly to see how the grid unfolds for next year with those names mentioned, Bearman, Antonelli, Lawson as well, all circling for a seat. But on track, in the last minute and a half, we are getting a little bit more action. This is the sound of Oscar Piastri, who has gone out on the soft compound tyre, making his way through the left-hander of 130R before he brakes just before the 100-metre braking board into the final chicane. The Casio triangle, the pit lane entry to your right. Little twitch on the steering wheel as he adjusts to get round the final right-hander, and across the line he goes fastest with a 1:36.862. Also out there, Hamilton's out on the soft, so is Zhou Guanyu in the Sauber. Albon is out there on the intermediate tyre, I think, although I would think he would have gone on the softs. if we're acknowledging what you said on the radio a little earlier. Magnussen also out there on the intermediates on an out lap. Leclerc, Sainz, Norris, Ocon all heading out in these last couple of moments on the soft compounder tyre to get a little bit of track action in and bring a smile to the packed out grandstands, who will get at least a little bit of action before we wave the checkered flag for the opening day of running ahead of the Japanese Grand Prix. Hamilton making his way on his fast lap now up through the S's. Gets a little bit of a snap on his steering wheel, has to correct it as he heads uphill through turn 6 and then plunges downhill, approaching the left-hander of 7 up through Dunlop curve over the crest. He's got a little bit of traffic in front of him in the form of Esteban Ocon, who gets out of the way as Hamilton dabs on the brakes to Degner 1, the quick right-hander, and then into the almost 90-degree right-hander of Degner 2. The Sauber of Valtteri Bottas's old teammate moves out of the way as Hamilton makes his way into the left-hander of the hairpin. Takes a little bit of curb running out of the exit of turn 12 and now into the slightly right-hander curved straight that brings you to Spoon curve. Piastri first to take the checkered flag, goes faster with a 1:34.725 to his name. Hamilton personal best in sector 1. Let's see how close he can get to Piastri's time. In fact, he's fastest of anybody in that middle sector as he now makes his way through the left-hander of 1:30R. Sainz, Norris all taking the checkered flag but not quite able to get a lap time on the board in time. Hamilton round the final corner, second fastest, a 1:35.2, half a second down from Piastri.
Yeah, and I tell you who technically you could say be breathing a sigh of relief that they didn't really miss too much will be Logan Sargeant. Didn't venture out during this session because his car was too badly damaged from the incident that he had earlier on in free practice. One chassis was okay, but the rest of the car too badly damaged, not enough time between the sessions for them to fix, as Charles Leclerc goes across the line, only pops up into P3, 4 seconds away from Oscar Piastri, so clearly didn't want to push it too hard, did Charles Leclerc, as pretty much everyone that's out on track now has crossed the line, including Kevin Magnussen, who will be the final driver to take the flag.
This is the sounds of Lando Norris just coming out of the pit lane a little earlier, and as he comes out on the soft compounder tyre, immediately finding a bit of a wet patch and having to bail out of it, take to the runoff area, loses the rear end. Keeps it pointing in a straight line though. Last thing he wants in these closing stages is to go sailing off into the wall, but he holds it for the time being. Well, checkered flag out then, and that ends a rather tedious free practice 2 session, I think it's fair to say. Not that much track running, too wet, too dry. We couldn't quite find the right track conditions until the very end, it seemed. But Oscar Piastri then on the soft compounder tyre, fastest for McLaren, a 1:34.7 ahead of Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc third, Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo the top 5, Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, Zhou Guanyu and Alex Albon, the 9 drivers to set a representative lap time, with Bottas, Magnussen, Hülkenberg and Ocon all venturing out and rounding out the top 13 positions. And those who didn't even come out in that session of the pits: Verstappen, Sargeant, Gasly, Perez, Alonso, Stroll and Russell, all firmly staying in their box. Indeed, Logan Sargeant was always going to miss this free practice 2 session after extensive damage to his Williams car after his collision or incident in FP1. The team working hard overnight then to get the American out for free practice 3, the final practice session before we head to qualifying, and you can hear it all live on 5 Sports Extra. Free practice 3 from 3 in the morning on Saturday. It's an early one. Qualifying again on 5 Sports Extra, and you can tune into that from 5 to 7 in the morning as well. So Alice, not really a representative day. Hard to get any kind of a gauge. Verstappen and Red Bull topped FP1. FP2 is the time when qualifying will take place, so we thought that might be the more representative session. There could still be a chance of rain tomorrow, though, as well.
Yeah, no, there's certainly a chance of rain for sure. But we didn't learn a great deal from that session. Just that no one was really very thoughtful, I thought, during that session, because no one wanted to go out and dry the track for the rest of the field. I'd say that's probably what we learned.
Well, you can read the full review on the BBC Sport website, I'm sure, for all the very latest. But we'll see you for Free Practice 3 at 3 in the UK on 5 Sports Extra. At the moment, it's looking like Max Verstappen is coming back with a vengeance, having had to retire last time around, but still the story to be told. My thanks to Alice Powell, my thanks to Andrew Benson. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.